The first time I realized Karen had finally lost it was when I opened my front door, barefoot, coffee in hand, and saw a cement truck backing into my driveway. Not parked. Not turning around. Pouring. And there she was, arms crossed, pearls on, and that smug HOA vice president smile like she'd just called in an airstrike on a gopher. I blinked, thinking maybe I was still dreaming. Then the driver hopped out and said, "Yep, Karen said this was approved." Full pour, right? Approved? By who, Satan? It took me a full 10 seconds to process that my car was trapped inside my garage, that my driveway was actively being filled with fast-drying concrete, and that Karen, my neighborhood nemesis for the past 18 months, had somehow found a new level of suburban psychopathy. "You've had too many guests lately," she said, like she was talking about raccoons. "It's disturbing the harmony of the block." I stared at her in disbelief. "So, your solution was to entomb my car?" She shrugged. "Consider it a passive-aggressive barrier." "You're welcome." I sprinted to my car like I was trying to rescue it from a volcano. Too late. The bricks were already being set on top of the wet cement, like some cursed Lego prison. I called the police, the city, the HOA president. No one could do anything immediately. And Karen? She had her fake permits ready. Printed. Laminated. Color-coded. It was like she'd been planning this. And the worst part? I couldn't even move my car for work that day. I had to call my boss and explain that I was bricked in by a rogue HOA member. He laughed. I didn't. My house had become a monument to petty warfare. And Karen? She stood across the street, watering her roses with the same energy a Bond villain uses to stroke a white cat. This wasn't the first time she'd pulled something ridiculous. She once sent me a written violation for improperly whimsical holiday lights. Another time, she reported my dog to animal control for excessive tail wagging. But this was cement. Cement is forever. And so was the rage bubbling inside me. That night, I sat in my garage staring at my bricked-in car like it was a tombstone. Neighbors walked by and offered condolences like someone had died. One guy even brought me a casserole. Saw it on the neighborhood Facebook page. Karen's live-streaming it. She's calling it Operation Community Order. I opened the app and there she was, broadcasting like she was a DIY expert, explaining the beauty of strategic landscaping as deterrence. Strategic landscaping? It was a concrete war crime. I tried to keep calm. Really, I did. I even considered renting a jackhammer. But I knew Karen. If I made one wrong move, she'd call the city, the HOA, and possibly the ghost of her last victim. No, if I wanted to beat Karen, I needed something big. Something loud. Something that would make the whole block question why they ever gave her a clipboard and a walkie-talkie. That's when I remembered Uncle Mike. Mike was the family black sheep. Not in a criminal way, more in a, he once got banned from 3 counties for overzealous demolition, kind of way. He was a retired demolition expert, a conspiracy theorist, and the proud owner of 2 tank tops that said, "Wreck it or regret it." He also owed me a favor. A big one. I called him that night. "Mike," I said, "I need a wrecking ball." There was a long pause. Then a slow, excited exhale. "Say less." The next morning, Karen strutted outside in her tennis skirt, ready to gloat. "How's the new patio?" she smirked. I just smiled. "Enjoy it while it lasts." By that afternoon, Uncle Mike's demolition truck rumbled down the street like a prehistoric beast, towing a shiny, beautiful, completely legal mobile wrecking ball. Karen's face went from smug to shocked to scream incoming within seconds. She bolted out of her house like the Queen's corgis just caught fire. "What is that?" she screeched. I held up my city-approved demolition permit like a trophy. "Just a little yard work. You started it. I'm finishing it." She fumbled for her phone, already dialing. "You can't do this. This is destruction of property." I nodded. "Correct. My property. That you vandalized with bricks and cement. That's now being removed." Loudly. She screamed something about emotional distress and fled inside. The neighbors gathered again, this time with lawn chairs and sodas, like it was neighborhood movie night. Better than Netflix, someone muttered. And me? I just stood there, sipping iced tea, watching my revenge roll into place like a beautiful, swinging angel of justice. This was just the beginning. The thing about revenge is, it's a lot like home improvement. You think a hammer will do the trick, then you realize you need permits, tools, backup, and at least one uncle who treats OSHA regulations like polite suggestions. I stood there, watching Uncle Mike do stretches beside the wrecking ball like he was about to wrestle it. "Haven't used one of these beauties in years," he said, cracking his knuckles. "Still got the muscle memory, though. You sure you want to go through with this?" I didn't hesitate. "Oh, I'm sure." Karen built a wall, and now it's time for demolition diplomacy. We couldn't just start swinging, though. Turns out there are a lot of regulations when you're swinging several tons of steel in a residential area. So before anything could begin, I spent hours diving through paperwork, permit offices, and deeply unhelpful city websites that looked like they hadn't been updated since the fax machine era. Karen, of course, tried to stop everything. She marched to City Hall with a binder full of complaints, citations, and what I can only assume were printed screenshots of me parking slightly crooked in 2022. But the beauty of having proof, photos, videos, receipts from the cement truck, meant that even the HOA had to take a step back. One member actually muttered, "Honestly, this is on her." By the end of the week, I had the permit. Not just any permit, either. A full residential demolition waiver, thanks to the fact that Karen had technically turned my driveway into a public hazard by blocking emergency vehicle access. Uncle Mike cheered when I showed it to him. "We're in business, baby," he said. "Now let's talk safety goggles and destruction angles." We ran into our first hiccup pretty quick. The wrecking ball wasn't exactly designed for surgical strike. It was meant for old buildings, not suburban cement patios. So our first test swing cracked a portion of my sidewalk, terrified a squirrel into moving zip codes, and somehow triggered a car alarm 3 houses down. Karen stood on her lawn in full tennis gear, recording everything like she was filming a courtroom documentary. "This is harassment," she yelled. "This is suburban terrorism." Uncle Mike waved. "Hi, Karen. Blink twice if you regret your life choices." That only made her angrier. She started yelling at anyone who would listen. First the mailman, then 2 joggers, then a confused Uber Eats driver. "This is an unsafe environment," she shrieked. "That ball could hit anything. It could destroy my rose trellis." Someone down the street shouted, "Good." Despite her tantrum, things started moving. Uncle Mike adjusted the chains, recalibrated the swing path, and slowly, methodically, brought the wrecking ball back to rest. Then, with all the build-up of a superhero origin scene, he let it swing forward. It hit the edge of the brick wall with a thunderous clang, sending a section of it crumbling like it owed someone money. The sound echoed down the block. Neighbors peeked out. Kids on scooters stopped and stared. One guy clapped slowly. Karen let out a scream so sharp it made 3 birds scatter. "This is not over," she bellowed. "I will call every agency in this city. I will get lawyers." But all her threats were hollow now. She had made the first move, and I was just cleaning up. Legally. We spent the rest of the day alternating between swinging, cleaning debris, and trying not to laugh every time Karen gasped dramatically from her porch. By evening, half the bricks were gone and the cement was cracked enough that we could pry it up in slabs. Uncle Mike was in his element. He had that wild, unhinged joy only demolition people have, the kind that says, "I love my job and insurance is for cowards." That night, Karen tried one last petty move. She sent an HOA-wide email accusing me of turning the neighborhood into a construction zone, complete with dramatic photos of debris hazards and reckless equipment operation. Unfortunately for her, someone else on the board, Ms. Lopez, who had beef with Karen going back to a bake sale incident, forwarded the thread to everyone, adding her own commentary. You mean the debris you created when you cemented someone's driveway? Sit down, Karen. The email went viral in the neighborhood. People were choosing sides like it was a reality show. Team Karen or Team Driveway. Lawn signs even started popping up. One read, "Let him swing." Another had a cartoon of a wrecking ball hitting a brick with Karen's haircut drawn on it. I didn't make them, but I wasn't mad either. Karen, in full panic mode, began issuing HOA citations like confetti. She gave my neighbor a warning for a suspicious lawn ornament, another 4 excessive wind chimes, and even ticketed a teenager for aggressively loud flip-flops. She was spiraling, and everyone could see it. I caught her yelling at her own mailbox one morning. It didn't respond. On day 3 of demolition, things escalated. Karen actually tried to block the wrecking ball's path by dragging her garden bench into the swing radius. Uncle Mike, bless his heart, stopped everything, got out of the cab and walked over. "Karen," he said, voice calm and steady, "if that bench is still there in 30 seconds, it's going to the same place your brick wall went." She moved it, muttering something about lawsuits and bad karma. Finally, after hours of swinging, hammering, hauling, and more swinging, the last brick fell. My driveway was clear. My car was free. I almost cried. It was a weirdly emotional moment. The whole neighborhood stood and applauded like I just won a championship. Someone handed me a juice box. A kid on a hoverboard shouted, "Victory is yours." It was glorious. Karen, meanwhile, slammed her shutters shut and disappeared from view. She hadn't spoken directly to me once in the last 2 days. But I knew that silence was temporary. This was Karen we were talking about. She wasn't done. Not by a long shot. Uncle Mike stood beside me, covered in dust and pride. "So, what now?" he asked. I looked at the clean space where the bricks had once been. I looked at the neighbors cheering, the setting sun, and the busted remnants of Karen's sabotage piled up in a dumpster. I smiled. "Now," I said, "we give her a reason to never try this again." It was the next morning when I realized Karen wasn't just angry, she was on a full-blown crusade. I was sipping my coffee and admiring the now-clear driveway when a white sedan screeched to a halt in front of my house. Out stepped 2 police officers, followed closely by Karen, who was already pointing and pacing like a tour guide to chaos. "There it is," she shrieked. "That's the weapon of mass destruction. He's terrorizing the neighborhood with it." One of the officers looked from Karen to the now idle wrecking ball resting in the rental lot beside my garage. "Ma'am," he said carefully, "this appears to be parked." Karen was having none of it. "It's not just parked. He's been swinging it around like he's demolishing the Leaning Tower of Pisa. My rose garden is dead, my ceramic gnomes are emotionally shattered, and my HOA presidency is under siege." The officer turned to me, clearly exhausted already. "Sir, do you have permits for the equipment?" I handed them over with a smile. "Laminated. Sign. Timestamp." Karen's eye twitched as the officer read through the paperwork. "Everything seems in order here. And, actually, ma'am, he's demolishing his own property. The city even signed off." Karen looked like she'd just bitten into a lemon soaked in vinegar. "I'll sue," she whispered. "For noise pollution. For property value destruction. For emotional distress." The second officer raised an eyebrow. "You poured cement into his driveway." She snapped, "That's a landscaping choice." "It was vandalism," I corrected. "But thanks for the foundation, it's going to make a killer patio." The officer chuckled, which only made things worse. Karen's face turned a shade of red usually reserved for malfunctioning fire hydrants. After they left, the neighborhood practically turned into a tailgate party. People brought folding chairs and snacks, taking turns telling Karen horror stories like campfire legend. One guy said she once reported his bird feeder as unauthorized wildlife activity. Another claimed she measured his hedge height with a ruler and a flashlight. But now the tide had turned. The swing of the wrecking ball had been more than physical, It had shifted the power dynamic. And Karen? She was desperate to get it back. The next day, she tried another tactic. She called an emergency HOA meeting. Not in the usual community center, no. Right in her backyard. Folding chairs, podium, and even a fruit tray like this was some kind of peace summit. Everyone showed up, mostly out of morbid curiosity. Karen stood at the front in a bright pink pantsuit, hair sprayed to the heavens, holding a binder thick enough to stop a bullet. "Thank you for coming," she said with that tight, fake smile. "We are here to restore dignity and order to this neighborhood after a tragic outbreak of unlicensed destruction." I stood in the back, arms crossed, sipping a Capri Sun someone handed me. A few neighbors glanced over, smirking. Karen continued. "We've all seen the horror. The swinging. The dust. The noise. And now, people are mocking me. Me. Your dedicated HOA vice president. There are lawn signs calling me names. There's a meme of my face edited onto a brick." Someone near me muttered, "Yeah, but it's a great meme." Karen tried to regain control. "This is not just about me. It's about our community, our peace, our HOA rules. We cannot allow wrecking balls to become the norm." Someone raised their hand. "But he had a permit." She blinked. "Permits can be forged." "It was notarized," I said loudly. "Want a copy for your binder?" That's when the twist happened. Ms. Lopez, the treasurer of the HOA and a long-time silent sufferer of Karen's reign, stood up and cleared her throat. "Actually, I'd like to bring something up." She pulled out her phone and played an audio recording. Karen's voice blasted from the speaker, loud and clear. "I don't care if it's legal. I'm blocking his driveway with cement, and if he calls anyone, I'll just say it's community beautification. They won't touch me. I am the HOA." The crowd went dead silent. Karen lunged forward. "That's taken out of context." "You said it while holding a shovel," Ms. Lopez replied. "And the HOA funds you used to rent the cement mixer? Tracked it. That's embezzlement." Karen's mouth opened, then closed. Her binder slid from her hands, scattering papers like a snow globe of failure. It was beautiful. The meeting dissolved into chaos. Someone yelled, "Impeach her." Another shouted, "Check the gnome budget." Karen backed away, stammering, "You're all ungrateful. I made this neighborhood." Someone replied, "You made it worse." That evening, a notice went out. Karen had been suspended pending investigation. The HOA board would vote on her removal the following week. In the meantime, she was stripped of all decision-making powers, including, to her horror, her cherished authority over lawn citations. I heard she tried to write one on a napkin later that night and was promptly ignored. But Karen, being Karen, wasn't finished. The next morning, I walked outside and noticed something strange. My driveway was clean, too clean. No debris, no dust, not even a leaf. Suspicious, I checked the footage on my doorbell camera. Around 3 a.m., Karen had crept over with a mop and bucket, scrubbing like Cinderella on espresso. She must have hoped it would make me look like the bad guy again. But instead, the video went viral. Captioned Karen, Queen of Late-Night Cleanup. The clip spread across the neighborhood group chat like wildfire. Someone added music. Someone else auto-tuned her muttering into a remix. Even the local pizza guy mentioned it when he dropped off an order. "Hey, is this the driveway from TikTok?" By now, Karen's spiral had reached terminal velocity. She stopped making eye contact with anyone. Her mail piled up. Her blinds stayed shut. I caught a glimpse of her once, peeking out like a ghost behind curtains. The wrecking ball had long been returned, but its legacy remained, not just in the now-clear driveway, but in the sudden sense of freedom that swept the block. People started decorating their lawns again. Wind chimes came back. One neighbor bought a flamingo wearing sunglasses. As for me, I was already planning my next move. Karen might have been quiet now, but she was a volcano of passive aggression, and I knew she'd erupt again. But this time, I'd be ready. Because now, I didn't just have Uncle Mike. I had the neighborhood. and together we'd turned the most entitled HOA tyrant into a meme, a punchline, and a warning label. And I wasn't done yet. Karen may have gone radio silent, but I knew better than to believe she was done. Silence wasn't peace, it was plotting. That woman thrived on conflict the way a mosquito thrives on a humid summer night. And sure enough, exactly 72 hours after the HOA stripped her powers, I got served. 4 lawsuits. Not 1. Not 2. 4. All of them handwritten, all of them ridiculous. She claimed I caused emotional trauma with my reckless swinging, that I was responsible for the death of her favorite gnome, Sir Bricksworth, apparently, that my publicly humiliating stunt had lowered her property value by $14,000, and, this one was my favorite, that I endangered community wildlife by making a squirrel relocate. She included a blurry photo of the squirrel mid-jump. Now, I wasn't too worried. Most of it was nonsense, and her evidence consisted of screenshots from her own live stream, which mostly just showed her pacing around yelling about decorum. But the real kicker? She had filed these claims using HOA legal templates she no longer had access to, which meant, legally speaking, she was impersonating an acting official. That little detail would come back to bite her harder than a caffeine-fueled raccoon. I showed the documents to Ms. Lopez, who had unofficially become the Karen resistance leader. She laughed so hard she dropped her smoothie. Then she called an emergency HOA meeting, not the kind with folding chairs and fruit trays. This one was formal. Board members, vote sheets, even a lawyer on Zoom who looked like he'd been waiting his entire career to take down someone like Karen. She didn't show up, of course. Sent a strongly worded email instead, accusing everyone of collusion and claiming the HOA had been infiltrated by rebellious lawn anarchists. She had truly entered her final form. The vote was unanimous. Karen was officially removed from her position, barred from rejoining the board for 5 years, and fined for misuse of HOA resources. But they didn't stop there. Turns out, while digging through her financials, the board found more shady activity, like the fact that she used HOA funds to pay for a private gardening consultant, hosted 3 board meetings, that were really wine nights with her book club, and spent $76 on a novelty, HOA Queen mug set. She was going down, and hard. I figured that was the end of it. But then came the best twist of all. The city inspector. Apparently, during her crusade to block my driveway, Karen had violated multiple city ordinances, one of which involved improper use of construction material on residential property lines. Another had to do with misreporting a noise complaint to justify vandalism. And then, the cherry on top, Karen had never actually gotten permission to modify the sidewalk area, which technically belongs to the city. So the inspector rolled up with a clipboard and a camera, and within 30 minutes, her yard had more red flags than a reality dating show. They slapped her with a mandatory remediation notice, which meant not only did she have to tear down the illegal brick structure on my side, but she also had to rip up her own matching aesthetic border that ran along her entire front yard. And to top it off, they gave her 30 days to comply. No appeals. No grace period. She had broken city codes, misused HOA funds, and turned her street into a demolition derby, all because she didn't like that I had too many visitors. The day the work began, I hosted a driveway party. Not just any party. I rented a DJ. Had food trucks parked on the newly cleared driveway. Even strung up a banner that read, "Welcome to the block, brick-free since last Tuesday." The entire neighborhood came out. Kids danced. Seniors played cornhole. Someone brought a karaoke machine and belted out, "Hit the Road Jack." Karen watched it all from behind her curtains, blinds slightly cracked, the silhouette of her fuming figure barely visible. Midway through the party, Ms. Lopez stood on a cooler and made an announcement. "In light of recent events, I'd like to introduce a new candidate for HOA president." She pointed at me. I choked on my taco. "He's resourceful, reasonable, and most importantly, He survived a direct attack with a wrecking ball and came out cleaner than his driveway. Let's hear it for our next HOA leader. The crowd erupted. People chanted. One guy threw a balloon in the air. And just like that, Karen's worst nightmare had materialized. Her target was becoming her replacement. The next day, I found something curious on my lawn. A small package, no return address, but clearly hand-delivered. Inside was a single broken ceramic gnome and a note. It read, "This isn't over." No signature. No threats. Just 5 words dripping with passive-aggressive rage. I placed the gnome shard on a shelf in my garage, right next to the laminated permit. A trophy of sorts. Weeks passed. Karen's yard was stripped down like a crime scene. The rose trellis was gone. The bricks were carted away. Her once manicured garden now looked like a post-apocalyptic sandbox. And for once, her mailbox was silent. No warning slips. No printed grievances. Just silence. Pure, uninterrupted peace. People began doing things they hadn't dared before. One neighbor installed a rainbow flamingo display. Another painted his shutters neon green. I even saw a guy testing out wind-powered garden lights. It was like spring had finally come to our block, and Karen's iron grip had melted with the snow. I won the HOA election in a landslide. Not that there were many candidates. Even my dog got a write-in vote. At the first meeting, we passed a motion that no resident could ever block someone's driveway again, for any reason, even in the name of emergency decorative enhancements. The clause was dubbed the Karen Amendment. It passed unanimously. Now every time I pull into my clear, brick-free driveway, I take a deep breath and smile. Not just because I won or because Karen was dethroned, but because something bigger happened. The neighborhood changed. People stopped being scared of her. They started talking, laughing, coming together. All it took was one wrecking ball, one uncle with demolition tendencies, and a whole lot of patience. As for Karen, she still lives across the street. Occasionally, I catch her watching from behind her window, her curtain twitching like a nervous tick. But she doesn't speak, doesn't storm, doesn't file. And honestly, that's victory enough. I still keep that broken gnome on my shelf. A reminder that no matter how strong the bricks, a little swing of justice, and a lot of community, can knock down even the most stubborn walls.